Hey everyone, this is Jason Fulmore, SE Russell, here with Jaxon, Bast. Jaxon, how's it going?
It's going well. How about yourself?
I'm okay. Busy week for me. Tennessee State duels last weekend, Georgia State tournament this weekend, Alabama sectionals, North Carolina has their regionals. So a lot going on. I understand you're equally as busy up in Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it a couple times. I work with the sports information department up here, and we've had a pretty busy week. Got the opportunity to use a new system the other day, and although it was a tad bit frustrating, I know it made the viewing, the viewership went way up because the viewing experience was amazing. But it's all worth it. Got more athletics this week, but I'm glad I got some time to sit down and talk wrestling.
Yeah, and to be fair, you're getting to kind of cover wrestling for Bluefield as well, so that's always fun.
Yeah, I got to. There's a try match tonight. It's senior night, so we'll recognize a couple of our seniors while I get to commentate some of my teammates. I know that I've sitting out this year hasn't been the most fun, but I've been keeping myself busy.
Yeah, no doubt. So just real quick before we get to everything, who are you guys wrestling tonight?
We're wrestling Emory and Henry, Division III in Emory, Virginia, and then we are also wrestling West Virginia Tech, which is a kind of a charter, like a what's the word? Satellite school for West Virginia in Beckley, which is about 45 minutes away. So couple in town for as close as Bluefield can get to any other town, in town rivals. We're in the middle of nowhere, and I love it because it makes you're more focused on things, less distractions. But that's what it is.
All right. Well, we are together today because we're going to talk a little bit about the Alabama sectionals, some of the big things. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand kind of what we're doing as far as this goes. There are 14 weights, 6 sectionals. So there would be a lot to cover. Don't have that amount of time to be able to cover it before sectional tournament, but we'll get to that when we get to the state tournament. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover some of the big ideas for each of the sectionals and things that, you and I kind of noticed that they kind of stood out. Does that work for you?
Oh, of course. And of course, we're looking at the preseeds. It's Wednesday. Right. They're probably arguing them now. You don't see too much change. It happens very rarely, but we're going to go off of what we have right now.
All right. I think I'm glad you brought that up because that is definitely it could change. And I think that that's important for everyone to know that we're having a conversation based on what we think will be kind of the top seeds and that sort of thing. All right. So let's jump to 7A North. You good with starting there? That's kind of your hometown, isn't it?
Yeah. I've won a sectional title, made to the finals once or twice up there.
All right. So we're going to jump to 7A 106. And I love the 106-pound weight class because, well, I guess beyond the top 3, the top 3 could all really be in the hunt for a state title, much less a sectional title. What do you see out of the 7A 106s?
I mean, obviously, this is personally what I think one of the deepest weight class. I know you see Colton West from Bob Jones. He's got the number 7 slot.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it?
I know 41 and 16. I know I watched him and Kirk go at it in the Region 5 dual championships between James Clemens and Bob Jones. And Kirk's one of those kids. I think he was a transfer who came in, who now wrestles at James Clemens. And he's been on an absolute tear through the North. I don't think he's gotten to be able to get a hold of anybody from Birmingham, but I'll be interested to see where all this kind of fills out. And then obviously I'm a little impartial, but I think McQueenie is one of those dark horses that I think may be able to slide into that 4 slot. But obviously I'm pretty dead set on those 1, 2, and 3s. Pretty much they could rotate around, but it's going to be a pretty solid 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. So I think it's really important that you brought that up because 7A qualifies 4 out of the North and 4 out of the South. Same in 1A and 4A, 4 and 4, and 5A, 6A qualifies 8 out of the North and the South. So different size brackets depending on which classification we're talking about. So there's only 4 slots, and the top 3 three of the top kids in 7A are sitting right there in the North. So that a battle for that last spot could be fun to watch.
And obviously, we're going to see that Kyan Simon and Stone Phillips matchup that I know a lot of us have been dying to see. I don't think Huntsville didn't get to Russell Vestavia, or if he did, he probably wrestled Wallace. And that was another big storyline. We finally got to see who they're going to put out when it comes to state, because I know Wallace Blue and Kyan Simon were in that position battle.
Yeah, and they were in that position battle, and that's actually, yeah, I bet you that was an interesting, tough, wrestle off in that room. That would have been fun to watch, actually. Two of the best 106s around.
It's absolutely insane, and I know that occurrence. I don't think we're going to talk about heavyweight, but I know that also happened with Hayden Bradford, who was a returning state placer. I guess he lost the wrestle off. I know that he lost once to Bradley Wilborn from Huntsville in season. I wrestled both of them. Bradley I was training with him over the summer because he came down to Warrior. He's a tough kid, but he's young, and I think if you had the option, and I've talked to a couple coaches, the one I talked to and the one that always sticks out to me was Coach Welton, and he told me that if I've got a freshman and a senior, and they're always wrestling, and it's really even, and it's going to come down to that coach's decision, he's going to go with the young guy.
Well, I mean, he has an opportunity to continue to develop him over time. So, although you'd like to see the senior get an opportunity, but yes. You brought that up at heavyweight, but I think also it might have happened at Bob Jones as well, because I don't see Maddox Sunderman in the list, but we do see Tafari Alsimi. I don't know how to say his last name, or yeah.
They all call him Taffy.
So it's that's some of these battles. I mean, I'm sure it happens at Thompson. I'm sure it happens at Vestavia. I'm sure it happens in Huntsville and Hewitt and so on and so forth. So, tough battles to get into the starting lineup to even be able to compete. All right, so let's jump to 182. And, 182 is interesting. And we're going to combine this with the other idea. And that is, when I first pulled these pre-seeds up, I was expecting to see John Edwards in this, and he's not. So he's down at 170, which I wouldn't say it opens it up, because 182 is deep. I mean, a lot of really good weights, or a lot of really good wrestlers. Again, we talked about the top three really taking care of, I would think, their spots. The question is who will come in at number 4. But you tell me what you think.
Well, obviously, even though I know Will, I was a little surprised he got that number 1 seed. Evan Pippin, as a sophomore, won the North section at 182. Was battling an injury last year, didn't end up wrestling. And then obviously you had Saunders come in late. I think that was always kind of in the works. I know Edwards was weighing in a little lower than what was expected, but honestly, I was expecting Pippin to be the number 1, and I won't be surprised, how he will do when it comes down, in Birmingham on Saturday night.
Well, and I'm glad you brought it up again, because seeds are seeds, but being 1 here is super important. And the reason it's super important is because 2 and 3, you can almost flip a coin of who's going to win, in that type of situation. And winning your section, especially now that they're seeding state tournament, really sets you up to be able to make a run. Not finishing very well, or third, or whatever the case is in a section, makes your path more difficult. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I remember getting 4th my freshman year at state, and I had to wrestle James Edwards.
Oh, is that right?
The undefeated state champ. My freshman year, I had to catch now I think he finished his 4 years of being a defensive lineman at Clemson, but
not too shabby.
Nah, that was one of the only matches I think I had beat myself really bad before going into in high school.
All right, so to just pick up on what we were talking about there with John Edwards, his drop to 170. You I mean, that was probably in the works for quite some time. Saunders, it was important for Vestavia to be able to get him in the lineup because he was stuck up there and not really able to, they weren't able to utilize his skill set, with him sitting on the bench.
Well, yeah, and then they are very strategic. I know that Coach Adams is very much like it was Bob Jones, the Thompson. They always flip their schedule right before. I knew Oxford used to do it quite a bit right before because they want to always go for that team title. So I know it also happened at 126 with Fleury and Ferris. Ferris now wrestling 126. I think, yeah, Fleury's now at 32. But they're always going to try to push everybody out to where they think that they're going to be the most successful.
Yeah, individually most successful and as a team being able to pull in as many points as they possibly can. So let's jump to a really interesting weight, and that is 152. We again, I think Lucas Reeves is kind of established himself. Are you good with the pre-seeds the way they are, or is this surprising a little bit?
No, I mean, based on what I've seen, I would say that this is probably how I would have seeded it.
Okay.
I don't know. I think Marrero is going to be probably the biggest bracket breaker as a 3 seed. I mean, I haven't seen him wrestle these other two guys. So I don't know. Have they wrestled? I don't think they have wrestled.
Marrero, I don't know. Bob Jones, who did they wrestle in the duels? Did they wrestle Vestavia? They might have wrestled Vestavia. Boy, I can't remember off the top of my head. I know Reeves and Johnston have wrestled one another several times. Right. The thing that's really interesting for me is that are the top four pretty well established, or do you think that we could see somebody lower maybe making a break into and booking their trip to a state tournament?
Honestly, I would say the top 4 are pretty solidified at this weight.
Okay.
I don't see too many people trying to be able to get through Colby. I mean, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
Everyone else.
Right. But in terms of getting there, all you have to do is get that 4 spot.
Exactly.
And then you're and then you get a whole other weekend to kind of, figure out how you're going to figure out to get on that podium. So, yeah. All right. And this is our last one in 7A North that you and I wanted to talk about. And that is 132. And 132 is really interesting because you alluded to it earlier with Fleury moving up from 126. It's Austin Bird has had a super year, a super year, and at this weight class. And I know Fleury's wrestled some at 132 as well. Are you surprised that Fleury's 1 and Austin Bird's 2, or does it really matter?
No, and I couldn't see too much because obviously they didn't go into the wrestler detail, the criteria fully. Obviously, they show that it goes seed, then seed points or whatever, but they didn't see what was the true seeding criteria. And I have a big suspicion to believe it had to do with state placement at last year's state tournament being probably the number 1 because you see it at 113. I believe it's Yannick Simon is the 3 seed, but that's because Cale Tucker was a state finalist, and then Cam Tipton won state at 106. So I think that's what also brought that up.
Yeah. Now, so the question I have is that doesn't supersede a head-to-head matchup though, does it?
No, it does not. It but I remember, I think it was my senior year, and at 285, 2 guys were seated ahead of the guy who was ranked number 1 at heavyweight that year because he was not a state qualifier, but both of those were. Now, the other thing I think was interesting was the fact that we don't see a wrestler, J.R. Thompson, at 132.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know any insight to that. I know that he's battled with a couple injuries this season. I wouldn't have been surprised that he's got another year. You probably want to be healthy if you have that option. But overall, I mean, that's a deep weight. I think 13 is going to be a deep weight. But, that's the North for you. North's getting a lot tougher than it used to be. More teams shifting around. I'm not sure who gerrymandered the line. I don't know what Mason-Dixon line that divided the North and South, but it is what it is, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, no, it is interesting how you send Hoover south, but Spain Park north, and I don't know. I mean, I think Hoover's actually, technically geographically further north than Spain Park is.
All right, and then,
but
yeah, because it's like here, and then Oak Mountain's even
south
of us.
Yeah, so whatever. All right, so let's jump to 7A South since we made that transition, and let's actually begin with 126, and probably the easy favorite with Yanni Vines. But the thing that's really interesting about 126 beyond Yanni and maybe Cedric Abney is you got some freshmen in there who are kind of battling for those, a spot and punching their ticket to the state tournament. Is that what you were seeing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously those top seeds have better records, but I think this is one where we could see a little more variety. Maybe you see someone at that 6th spot or that Daphne. I know that Coach Jeff Coat does a fantastic job of preparing all his athletes for the postseason. There are coaches who are just really, really good at that. And, maybe he's able to push through. I've seen some crazy stuff like when Will Garrett beat Alex Mason a few years back as a freshman. Certain things that kind of foreshadow the rest of their career. It's going to be a big make or break moment for a lot of these freshmen this year.
Yeah. The thing that's really interesting as we look at this is I've seen Yanni wrestle a ton of times, and Cedric Abney obviously has some past and some credentials to go along with his name. What I'm really interested in, I don't know the answer, and I wonder if you do, and maybe you don't, is, Greer Hunt and Baylor Hardy, have they wrestled each other? Have they wrestled anybody else in the bracket? Is that how they got the 3 and 4? Is it based on records? It's certainly not based on past. Neither one of them wrestled at the state tournament last year, and Harrington is a returning state qualifier according to the notes.
Yeah, I mean, which would make me assume that at least somebody who's ahead of Harrington beat him,
right?
I think some of it is record based, but I mean, I'm not going to say I understand the seeding every year. Obviously, they're gonna go down, and like you said, you might see these little shifts. Obviously, you're not going to really try to fight for being difference between an 8 or a 9 seed, because you're going to end up in the same spot of the bracket regardless. But there are some important things, like maybe you want to get that the 3 instead of the 6 instead of the 5, because that puts you on a easier side of the bracket.
Yeah, especially if the 3 isn't super strong. Like, at that 106 in the North, the number 3 is just as good as the number 1, but the 4, maybe not. So you get more of an opportunity to beat the 4. You want to be the 5 because you're not going to beat the 1 anyway. But
exactly.
But if the 3rd is beatable, yeah, it's not bad to be away from the 1 and that sort of thing. So, all right, so let's jump to we're talking about 106. Let's talk a little bit about 7A South 106. What do you see here?
I mean, Thomas Gear has been absolutely dominant since he's made that drop. He took out what would be the number 2 in my books. I think Phillips was around that area. Jake Thompson, I think, is one of those kids that people don't talk enough about. He's been a scrappy guy, wrestling since he was probably 7 or 8 years old, and he's taken it to some guys. I know he's got those 7 losses tacked on to the bottom of his record, but he's a kid who I could see being one of those dark horse come next weekend. Obviously, I think he's
Yeah.
going to solidify himself in the finals. I don't know if Sanders can really take on Thompson, but Thompson's one of those guys who is either going to wrestle super great or maybe not his best. But when he wrestles super great, he kind of skyrockets. And I think that'll be a good matchup in the finals for him and Gear.
So one of the things I want you to just talk very briefly about is we see all these different records and we see losses and things along those lines. And I mean, records can be manipulated in so many different ways based upon the level of competition that you have. I mean, Thomas Garrett has got 9 losses, but the truth is every single one of those losses has happened up at 113. Okay. And Thompson goes to the Clash in Minnesota. They go to the knockout down in Florida. They wrestle the best competition around. So 9 losses doesn't worry me at all that Thomas Gear is not the favorite in 106. So talk a little bit about it, because I mean, there's other individuals who have more wins and maybe the same number of losses, but it's not the same thing.
No, and I don't, like I said, I don't know if Track calibrated it based on the significance of your loss. Obviously, I think Gear's got that number 1 spot because he made the finals last year.
Right.
But you're right, because Thompson, I've seen guys go in there who are 31-16, and it's because they lost 16 out of state between going to the Stampede or the Clash, or they went to Cheesehead a couple years. The St. Nick tournament where they get to wrestle Richmond Hill from Georgia, 6A powerhouse. It really just depends.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at another 2 weights that I think are really interesting in 7A South, and that is, we'll start with the 160-pound weight in 7A South. What do you see here?
I was looking at this with Garrett. Now, obviously, Garrett's kind of that top dog. I think this is one of those things where you might get to see some variance. I've seen Keith Christian from Hoover. Anytime I see him, the first time I ever met Keith Christian, he was wearing an Arizona State wrestling shirt. I said, "Oh, dude, did you commit to Arizona State?" He's like, "Nah." I'm like, "Yeah, I know that," but I was messing with him. But anytime he's the ASU commit in my book. But honestly, he's kind of shown up and showed out this last year. I think he fell in the semis at Heart of Dixie to Poe. But he's someone who could probably get into the finals. I think we'll see him. Haven't seen Roughton wrestle too much. And I think you might see those 3 and 4 spots might go to someone else who kind of wants it more. That's really what it's going to come down to in a lot of those gritty matches, is who wants it more.
Yeah, so I think that 160 is really interesting because I think Garrett as a defending state champ, is certainly the one. But who occupies the number 2, the number 3, the number 4, punches their ticket to the state tournament is pretty open. And whoever really has a good weekend has a real opportunity to put themselves in a good position. Would you agree with that?
100%. Like I said, it really, and I was being a little more abstract when I say the will to win, but it really is. Is it every given Sunday?
Oh, any given Sunday, right?
Any given Sunday.
Right.
It really comes down to.
All right. So 170, again, I think Freeman is probably our favorite, in this bracket, but this is kind of a mirror image of 160, in that there's a lot of individuals who can kind of fight for those spots for 2, 3, and 4, and getting second could be really important to how well they position themselves next weekend.
Yeah, and Logan Roberts, I know we were talking a little bit. I was a little surprised to see. I know that Roberts had wrestled a little bit of 170, but obviously we saw him at, I think it was 45, when he wrestled Clay Johnson in the Heart of Dixie finals. And then you got Dalton Kovacs, somebody who isn't super well known. He moved up from Florida. He was a North Florida guy. And, he's kind of been a little bit of an underdog. but Baker has branched out. Like Baker has done a fantastic job of going and finding more competition. I know that they were extremely limited last year. Obviously, their first year, they kind of were still building it up. Their second year, when they were ready to go seek that competition, COVID kind of hit them, kind of kept them in that Mobile bubble. But I think they've done an excellent job of kind of testing more and more of their guys. And that's why you see someone like at 220, I think Benjamin Basil's seated number 2. And that one, I don't know if that's going to stay the same. But like I said, what I'm trying to point out is that Baker has kind of made a name for themselves in 7A, kind of being that big powerhouse from Mobile.
Yeah, well, and I think it's pretty evident in the kids that they've got wins, that they're in position to do well in the South in sectionals. They should bring quite a few kids to Huntsville, and even getting second to a Thompson kid puts you in a position to make the podium, which is a really good, important next step in the evolution of a program. You made mention that you wanted to talk a little bit about Mary G. Montgomery.
Oh, well, the thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that obviously we're going to see another girl have a shot with Brooklyn Grant, who recently won the girls state championship. I think that she's got an excellent position of being able to beat. And I think Evelyn Holmes Smith would have been the first qualifier, but
in 7A.
In 7A. In 7.
Okay.
Sorry. Obviously that title goes to Hannah Gladden a few years back. But I think she'd be the first qualifier, and she can make some noise. I think is it she at 32 or is she 45? I can't remember.
I don't know off the top of my head. I can go look, but I don't know off the top of my head.
But I think that that's one of those weight classes where that 4 slot, there's a little bit of a gap. I think she might be able to solidify herself and make her the first 7A qualifier. And was Holmes Smith 1 match away from placing? I think she lost in the blood rounds last year.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, that's interesting. The other part that's really interesting, not only is the Brooklyn Grant and that sort of thing, is also that Mary G. Montgomery doesn't really have an established program, and to see the success from Brooklyn on the girls' side, and maybe what that kind of does to the program as a whole, especially if she were to qualify, I would think that it might have a little bit of momentum for their program.
I know I've talked to Coach Thomas. He used to coach at Hoover. I was in a Stavia Hills alum, so he's used to the Birmingham Metro kind of feel with wrestling. He went down there. He's built a program. Chris Duran, who was a multiple-time state qualifier for the Spanish Fort Toros, wrestled at Graceland for a short period of time. He's helping out of that program. I know that Grayson Curtis, who was a finalist his senior year in the sectional tournament, he's helping out at Baker. But I know that it's been, like you said, if you could get a state qualifier, and obviously Brooklyn Grant, I think she's from either Michigan or Wisconsin. I can't remember. He definitely told me, but I think that will bring a lot to a program. I've talked to numerous coaches who have been with that new program, and if you make it to state, that's step 1. But if you can get a couple wins at state,
no doubt, right,
a bigger thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think just a little further behind Baker, what Baker's trying to do, and we alluded to that before. So let's jump to 5A 6A, and 5A 6A North is, boy, it's a fun classification. It should be a great sectional. Let's start in 106. Remember, in 5A 6A we qualify 8, but that doesn't mean anything because the bracket is so much larger. So the path to being able to get a number 6, a number 7, number 8 spot is still pretty difficult. This is fun. This is a who's who of top 106s.
Exactly. And I'm looking at those top guys. Obviously, a lot of those guys have rotated where have they been in the standings. Unger took that number 1 spot for a couple consecutive weeks, being the only loss that Yannick Simon had in his high school career. And then you look at the depth. I mean, Chase Campbell from Springville, he's not a scrub, and he's number 9.
Right. No, and Connor Miller is number 10. I mean, these are kids that definitely have an opportunity to kind of slot in up here. So those blood round matches are going to be a lot of fun to see who actually punches their ticket.
And obviously, Carter Blaylock, Cole Blaylock's younger brother, Stone Stanton. If that last name sounds familiar for you, it should, because that's Coach Stanton's son, the head coach at Scottsboro. Now he's a guy who he's had a couple of I've heard you use the phrase when you type puzzling losses, but he's someone who I remember that my freshman year you typed it for Braden Moore from Sparkman.
Is that right?
Puzzling.
Well, because there are losses that I don't understand. I've watched you wrestle. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Well, no, it was funny because I thought you were alluding to me because I defensively pinned him.
Oh, I got you.
And it was like 158 because he was trying to tilt me. He was beating me, but it was whatever. But I I always loved that phrase, puzzling losses.
Well, you know what? Let's not bury the lead and jump right over to when the preseeds came out. The one thing that I was, and this doesn't mean that somebody is set in stone to go to certain weights or anything along those lines, but the absolute one thing that I was most interested in seeing was whether Isaiah Poe would be at 138 or not. And right now he is seated number 2 behind Corey Land. I think that's the match to make. I don't know if that's the match for Gardendale to try to win a state title because in a tight team race, but I really am interested in watching that match. That if you have, and I don't want to jump way ahead here, but they are just significantly better than most of the 138s or pretty much every 138 around. So that's a match that I'm just super interested in. Is that, I mean, I don't want to just do all the talking. What do you think?
I mean, that's the match. I mean, I don't have a problem saying that that's probably going to be the best match of the tournament from what I would gather. Obviously, these are 2 absolute studs, and I've talked about it that I think it's so cool that Poe's doing this because he's already made that decision. He doesn't have to prove himself to anyone.
Right.
He's already a 2-time state champ. What's that difference between a 3rd or a 4th title?
Right. Nothing. I mean, in all honesty, I mean, why not just go out there and test yourself against the best? But the only thing I do keep in mind is that Gardendale will be in a team race, a tough team race. And, 3, 4, 5 points, the difference between a first and a second. I mean, I'm not saying it could come down to it, or I'm not saying it will come down to it, but I am saying that those are valuable. So,
I mean, you're sticking right with that. I couldn't have put it any better myself.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm super, super excited though that you have that as a possibility. So, all right. So we talked about 1 Poe, and there was a Poe up at 106. Let's now jump to 160 with what I think is a tremendously good bracket with Melton Poe, Preston Reed, Dawson Williams, who only has 1 loss, Silva, on down. One person I think that everybody should pay attention to is Oliver Howard of Decatur down there at number 7. Go ahead.
Obviously, yeah, you got your top 4 guys, and then it seems like there's a little bit of a thing, and then you're rolling down this list. And if you're I would say if you're more of an avid Alabama State fan, you know who Oliver Howard is.
Right.
He's not a guy who's been able to wrestle yet varsity until this year, and he's a beast. A couple years back, he was wrestling in the Battle of the Finals, and he made his mark by taking out Isaiah Poe. But he is someone who he's a little bigger than I was expecting. I think I was expecting to be at 145. But I know that on the bottom side of this bracket, it's going to be from the south is going to be Gray Ortiz. So honestly, this is probably going to be one of the tougher weights to place at come Saturday. Like obviously, there's. I would say you got your top 5 guys. I would not be surprised if Howard's one of those guys who maybe gets moved up. But honestly, I don't know if it's going to matter because he's a tough kid.
Yeah, so this is actually a really good example of why it's important to not only have a good record, but have head-to-head matchups that you can use in your seeding. Decatur, they don't get out and wrestle a ton of other schools, especially a ton of other top schools in 7A or 5A, 6A. 23-1. I think Oliver made a run and was an NHSCA freshman All-American last year. And certainly somebody who hasn't wrestled at the state tournament, but I know around the Southeast. So, if you're the 2 seed and he's the 7 seed, you kind of feel like you got shafted a little bit because I don't think he's a true 7, but I understand why he's seated where he is. Anyway. All right. So let's jump to 195, the last weight we're going to talk about in 5A, 6A North. And pretty interesting that we got a Colby Clark here at the 1 spot, and Cole Carter, Jonathan Pugh. Boy, this is another fun weight class.
Yeah, and another one where I would say those the depth runs into those 7 and 8 seeds with Jimmy Reed and Trent Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is really interesting that Cole Carter is the 2 seed instead of the 1, and that Colby Clark's that 1 instead of the 3.
Yeah,
probably where I'm slating them back up. Cole Carter kind of came out of nowhere this season. It's now 58-2. Jasper has done so much traveling.
Yeah,
I don't want to see their gas expenses from this season, but no, I mean they traveled down to Auburn. They went to Scott Royer, and they've been all over the place. So that's a very impressive 58-2.
No, I agree with you. Right. So we've alluded to records before, and you're absolutely right that that's over some really good competition. And I have a tendency to agree with you. I'm a little surprised that Colby Clark is at 195 and not at 220. Also, I don't know if he's been wrestling down at 195, but that's and it matters. And the reason it matters is that Jonathan Pugh is sitting there at the 3 seed, and that's not an easy out. So we talk about using sectionals to position yourself to make a run at the state tournament or at a state title, and taking 1st or 2nd is super important. So anyway, all right, so let's jump to 6A South. And just as a general 6A South, what kind of pops off in terms of, when you were looking through kind of things that you were interested in?
The biggest one for me was the rematch up that we might see between Bryce Wanagat and his first name's Brady. I know he goes to Opelika, and I just lost his last name.
Campbell.
Brady. Okay, so it is Brady Campbell from Opelika. That's probably the biggest one for me that jumped out. I know that Campbell took out Trent Gillum and Bryce Wanagat in the same weekend.
Yes.
So, they did fix it because I thought Wanagat was the one earlier today. I could have been wrong, but I
don't know because this is pretty new. I mean, I'm pulling them up as as of and I've seen so many brackets and so many seeds over the last 3 days that I can't even keep track of what in the world's going on. So it definitely could have been flipped. One of the things that I think is really interesting is we've got a old guard versus new guard in terms of a freshman and a senior two fantastic 145s sitting at the top of this. And that's, I mean, and I don't want to take anything away from Whetstone or Griggs or England or anyone down the further down, but Brady Campbell has had one heck of a season.
He has. It's insane. Like I said, he beat Trent Gillum. He beat Bryce Wannegat in that one season. Wannegat is poised to be one of the few 6-time placers. And I think he'll be the only one in Pelham's history to be a 6-time placer.
Yeah. Wow. A 6-time placer. I keep track of all sorts of stats, and that's not a stat I've really paid much attention to. There can't be that many of them.
No, I mean, I actually think that outside of, because he went 6th to 7th grade year, 5th his 8th grade year, or maybe it was 4th his 8th grade year, 3rd his freshman year, 2nd his sophomore year, and then back to 3rd last year because he caught Jacob Deese in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, which I railed as that was one of the worst seedings. That was the one individual that I was like, how in the world is he seeded 7th?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that they had with the super, because it was super state essentially,
right,
is that if you didn't place
the previous year,
yeah, you were, which was dumb.
Right. In fact, Deese wasn't even the 7th seed. He was not even seeded.
He was the
right?
10. He was the 10 seed.
Oh, he's the 10 seed. Okay. Yeah.
Well, he was the 10 slot. I don't know if he was seeded.
Yeah. But the fact that he's a 2-time state champ and then was injured with the shoulder injury, I believe, like set up a potential final in like the second round. I mean, it was just crazy. It was absolutely crazy.
I think the other instance of that one that really popped out to me was Damian Lowry, who got the 14 spot. And I was like,
so we're talking about the heavyweights now in 5A, 6A.
Yes.
And Lowry again was another one. So every year I pick a bracket buster, and those are the easiest bracket busters in the world to pick because they were not seated correctly. They were sitting in a spot that they could beat anybody in the bracket, and both of them did. Both of them ended up state champions. So, all right. So let's jump to 126. What do you got for me?
I think this is an interesting weight when it comes to all the way down through 8 and 9. Honestly, lot of little bit of this, little bit of that. Waldrop, obviously, that clear favorite. 80-4. I was actually on the phone with my dad last night. He's like, 80-4. That's got to be some record. I said no. Weirdly enough, at McAdory, Stephen Bell was 91-0. And
at McAdory? Oh, is that right?
It was at McAdory, so he won't even get to beat that record. He might next year with the amount that McAdory drives. It's unbelievable. Noah Smith was one of those I would say one of the featured young guns freshman year last year.
Mm-hmm.
Made it pretty deep in the state tournament. Just failed to place by maybe 1 or 2 matches. Sandlin Pike has been a 2-time placer, a finalist his 8th grade year. And then Stuart Andrews, solid Mountain Brook guy, all the way to Muhammad, who I think last time I checked was ranked 5th. So he's seeded 5th too. Kind of shows you a little more depth. I believe Mooney from Shelby County.
Mm-hmm.
Crossed earlier this season, which is another really solid guy. And then Chase Lee, multiple time qualifier for Spanish Fort.
Yeah. So I think the way you broke that down is exactly the way I was thinking about it, in that, Hudson Waldrop's at the top. You've got Smith chasing a little bit in a pack, but then you got a really big pack that could finish anywhere from 3rd to 8th or not make it. And that's really interesting because it's the battles on the backside it's going to be super important to win like that quarterfinal round to get there, to make sure that you've established your place. And if you lose, to figure out a way to get back through, because a loss on that backside in the blood round would be tough to swallow.
Definitely would.
All right. So let's see. Let's go to 106 and kind of a I wouldn't say I think it's a surprising name at 106 with Trey Peeler.
Yeah, I mean that was a little surprising to me. Obviously, if you look at his wrestler detail, he spent a couple moments down at 13. Now I did not know until just right now that he had beaten Noah Guthrie. I think that they've exchanged wins and losses. Springfield kind of was at that number 5 slot for me when I did my mid-season rankings. But he is a tough kid. Now I am a little surprised that Guthrie is all the way down at 3. I figured that if anybody, probably is going to be that number 1. If I were to rewrite them, I'd probably put him at number 1. Miller, not falling far behind. You got Sykes, and then you kind of got this little gap about to Roman McWilliams, where I could see some flipping and flopping, but I could definitely see some lower seeds making in from 6 through 8.
So one of the things and the reason I brought up Trey's name is that Trey was a state qualifier last year, but I think he spent almost his entire season up at 113. I could be wrong. So seeing him down at 106, and I guess he has been at 106 some, because he does have a head-to-head with Guthrie and such. But I guess most of the ones I've noticed, he was up and very competitive at 113. Definitely a state qualifier at 113, maybe a section champ at 106 here. Definitely deep, especially amongst those top 3. And I think that you're right in that figuring out who the 1 is, so the other 2 have to see each other, is kind of interesting.
It just kind of goes how the cards are laid out.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump to 1A, 4A. And before I get to a specific thing with 1A, 4A, Asheville, boy, they did the job on our way to the duels. Weaver went out pretty early. We talked about Ohatchee. We talked about some of the other programs. Just as a general overview of 1A, 4A, before we get to that, is it going to play out similarly in traditional, or do you think it might be a little bit different? Because duels and traditional are so different from one another.
And that's exactly why I would say it's probably going to end up landing a little different. History tends to repeat itself. I saw Claiborne County won the duels last year. I think they finished 5th or 6th in the state. Weaver got knocked out first or second round last season. State runner-ups. Right.
Well, so, yeah, right. And close. I mean, Asheville really was pretty dominant. But yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it?
I know it just really depends on how they don't give up pins here, or they don't. You talk about it, that race to 8.
Yeah,
I think a lot of them
in duels, definitely. Yeah, and I'm glad we actually talked about this before we get to the 126s here in 1A, 4A North. This is South. This is South. Before we get to this, one of the things that I always pay attention to is the number of qualifiers you get through is super important, but also, getting 12 through is great, but if only 9 of them score, it's like only getting 9 of them through. So again, being really good in your section, and even getting 5th and 6th, or in 1A, 4A, 3rd instead of 4th, could be critically important ultimately to the team race. So anyway, let's jump to 126 and tell me what you see here. We only have 4 spots. So
I mean, obviously, I'm leaning towards that number one and number two. I could see that being a really interesting matchup in the finals, and that'll definitely set them in a better spot next Saturday. But I mean, outside of that, I think you've got a little more options. TR Miller is probably one of their better wrestlers. He's 42-6.
Brody Hayes from TR Miller. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Miller. And then you've got, classic Weaver. They're going to keep up, and it's stuff like that with the team. It was a couple years ago, and we mentioned it that it's really important to make it to state, because sometimes you can try to figure out where you're going to end up after that.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to, I think it was Carter Gill, who was a state placer his junior year, 2-time qualifier, and he said that Coach Adams was very, very imperative in making sure that they all understood that all you really had to do was make it to state, and we would take it from there. Like he knew that they were going to be able to flip, because that week is super important. That 1 week is going to be how you do in that state tournament. I know plenty of guys who win the section and then they think they've already won state, so they don't train hard that week.
Yeah, well, and so I did a little bit of analysis of this, and for several years ago, of different states, and while the section champs do win the majority of the time a state title, it's not unheard of. In fact, it's not uncommon for somebody who takes second or third to find a way to take and win a state title. So, it's one of those situations of, I think I'm just echoing what you just said, in that, being prepared and coming into the tournament prepared and ready to know that you can make a run for the state tournament or state title is super important. So being a section champ, super important, but it isn't the end all be all. All right, so let's jump to 160, and a wrestler I really like to watch, Joshua Johansson of Weaver, unbeaten, state champ, easily the number one, right? Easily the favorite. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then obviously you've got crap from W.S. Neal.
Mm-hmm.
He's 22-6. Him and I know Sponsler was one of the few Montgomery Catholic kids that I had ranked. Massey in important. I say that those 2 through 3 are pretty solid. I don't see too many of the people who from 5 and below being able to break in, but you never know. But I would say that the top 4 spots are pretty solidified. I could see 2 through 4 shifting a little bit.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
I got you. Okay. All right. Yeah. So, but you agree with me in that Johansson from Weaver is not only the favorite in the sectional, he's got to be probably the favorite in the state.
Oh, easily. I mean, I talk about it between Anderson, Johansson. Who's there? Is he their 60? He's their 70, right?
Johansson's their 60.
He's their 60.
So Anderson, Johansson, Anderson was a state champ, the returning state champ, right? Usry, USRY.
Yeah. I mean, that's the 1, 2, 3 punch that they've got when it comes to kids who are ranked
right
in number 1 spot, and that's where I think Weaver's going to end up taking home the bacon. Is when you get 20 points apiece from all 3 of those guys. That's 60 points from them alone, and it's already a solid team up and down that lineup.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. All right, so let's jump to 106, and I think it's going to be it's really interesting. The top 3 I think are pretty well established, but I see a lot of names that could slide into that number 4 spot. At least that's the way I look at it. I don't know if you look at it the same way.
I mean, I think it goes, 1. I would say it goes, Durnian, then Fink, then Corley, and then there is a gap, but I still think that is that Shelson?
Yeah, I think that's how you say it. I'm not 100% sure.
I do apologize for if I butchered that last name.
We always butcher names. It's just the nature of the beast here.
But Aiden Shelson, I mean, he's a tough kid. 21-9, Orange Beach. And honestly, I would say that I'm more on that Shelson's got that number 4 on lockdown.
Really? Okay. So I'm a big fan of the Bryson Pugh. The Pugh's out of Prattville Christian. I don't know. He's an 8th grader. I don't know if they've wrestled head to head or something along those lines. But I definitely think that he has a. I mean, you're not saying he doesn't have a shot. I'm just saying I think he's right there in terms of taking that number 4 spot. That honestly, that quarter between the 4 and the 5 there might be super important to the overall outcome of who ends up going and who ends up not having a ticket to the state tournament.
Yeah, and what just brought up there when you said he's an 8th grader from PCA is the fact that's important. I don't believe that Pugh was wrestled in the state tournament. I might be wrong.
I don't not the little one. I don't think. No.
That's what I thought. And that's super important. I know that being on that big stage, even sectionals, not quite as big as being in the Von Braun Center, but still in the Garrett Coliseum, you're still, everybody's looking at you. There's only 6 mats going on. It's gonna be important to see, how somebody can take on that pressure.
Yeah, I think actually that's a good thing. We were talking about earlier the evolution of teams of trying to get people to the state tournament and building off of that success and everything else. It's the same thing for a young wrestler, getting to the big stage and then going, oh, okay, and then coming back the next year and being familiar. I've been here before, and being able to excel as a result of already been in that situation.
Exactly. I mean, I've talked to numerous people where they probably would perform better. And that's where I think maybe something like the Campbell and Wannegat, let's say they cross paths somewhere at state, Wannegat's been there. And I'm not saying this is going to 100% happen, but where a senior and a freshman are, close knit, the person who's been there before might have a slight edge.
You would think they would. Now, whether that actually ends up happening or not, who knows? But yeah, I mean, actually, I was just talking to Lucas Da Silva about Georgia, and we were talking about the same thing. How you warm up. How long it is until you get a sense. I mean, you've been to tournaments, you've been to places, but where is the warm up space? You get used to it kind of being an environment you've already been in before. Whereas, when you're a freshman, that's a whole other ballgame of how you kind of adapt to the situation. So anyway, let's jump to 220 in the North. And what I think is a really interesting weight class. And we've only got 4 spots.
I definitely think that quarterfinal between the 4 and the 5 is going to be the biggest deciding factor between who goes to state and who doesn't. Obviously, Olsen, number 1 across the board. Thrash, he's done a little bit, at heavyweight and at 220,
and has wrestled really well. At both places, yeah,
exactly. And then you got Jeffries, who's been there before. Lauderdale, longtime wrestler for Oak Grove, I believe state qualifier, and then you got Smart from Piedmont at that 5. Now I don't see too much coming down from 6 and below, but you're fighting for that 4th spot.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That is totally somebody will be sitting home who feels like they deserve to be there, I think.
And they probably does, and sometimes it's just how the section is cut up. I know plenty of people who have beaten kids who maybe got 3rd in that other section, but it's just the way the cookie crumbles with a lot of this.
Yeah. So I'm actually glad you brought that up, because the difference in the strength of the sections is a thing. I mean, and I want to address it because, everybody kind of starts talking about, well, we should be there and this kid shouldn't be there and all these sorts of things and everything else. The truth is, these are drawn a long time before any of the kids fill in to, where they're going to wrestle and all the different things. So, you know, you deal with the cards that you got. And if you happen to be in Florida, we used to call 2A region 2 the region of doom. And it was the region of doom because it was simply, I mean, if you placed in the top 4 there, I mean, it was I think one year it was like 68% of the placers or something came from like that region out of all 4 regions. I mean, it was crazy how difficult that region was to get through. That happens, and it doesn't happen just simply in terms of sections as a whole. It also happens in certain weight classes. So you go out there and you wrestle your best. Is that ever kind of a thing? Were you ever looking at the other section going, man, I would have won that section, that's easy?
Yeah, no, that definitely happened. I definitely thought my sophomore year, if I was in the North, that I would have qualified. But I'm glad I didn't qualify. I think if I had qualified, I wouldn't have had that fire lit up my butt to get back out there and wrestle. But honestly, like, because I was thinking about it when we were talking the last time, is that the biggest thing that I always knew, and I was talking to a buddy, and he said the only thing that you ever something that I grasped from you was that the sectional tournament and the state tournament are just like every other tournament. I know
Right.
people may disagree with me, but if you treat them like they're every other tournament, the pressure is all off. You're just in a different venue.
Yeah, no, right. Well, and that's why it's really good, especially in these 1A, 4A schools. It can be one of those situations where you want to, you're used to going to, the gym that's not too far away, and it's an 8-person bracket, or it's this or that. Um, you know, if you can go and get an experience during the course of the season in a larger venue with a different kind of crowd and those sorts of things, and that's not always an option, but when you're able to do so, it's easier for you to then be able to apply that this isn't that the Von Braun Center is no different than what you're used to. So it's one of those situations where simply talking about it, you're right, but it doesn't necessarily always get through, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I'll tell you, and if you're a parent watching, I 100%. Now, obviously, you're going to know your kid better than I would, but if you think that they've got a good chance of winning a couple matches, I'm not saying All American, but if they can go to a Super 32 or an NHSCA, one of those really big tournaments, like I said, that made me feel like the Von Braun was super
Nothing.
tiny.
Right.
After I went
Right.
to Greensboro Coliseum and saw everything that was going on there, and then I wrestled at state, 2 completely different things.
Right. Yeah. Well, and back in the day, we used to talk about Fargo the same way, in that, you're on a stage in the middle of, I don't know, 28 mats. They're spread out all over the place, and there's a mat 1 in the center. You go back to somewhere else, it's not really anything. So anyway, let's jump to 120, and let's talk a little bit about a weight class that I think has some. I don't know that there's a clear favorite for me. There's a lot of different wrestlers who could kind of slot into the different places. Barrenhouse is obviously the one seed according to this in the PreSeeds, but there's a lot of people that could end up kind of filling those top 4 spots. Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree. I think this is probably the bracket that we've looked at the most, where I can see, like, obviously, I think Barrenhouse and Cass and Bramlett.
Mm-hmm.
Those are names. Those are some household names. I don't see them not making it into the top 4.
Right.
But I mean, there aren't a lot of names that Harris from Asheville is one. I think being part of Asheville is going to be extremely important. Or Lowe is with St. John Paul. These are certain things that if you're with a certain team and they know how to prep, that's extremely important. Or if you don't, honestly, it's not super intensive. When I mean by that, I mean like don't know how to describe it.
Okay.
It's just what I was trying to say was, although you're not maybe at an Asheville or a Weaver who have been very successful in the postseason, it doesn't mean you can't in any capacity whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, and actually, one of the things I wanted to bring back was that this is the type of situation where, especially if you're from a small school, Asheville will be pushing to try to get Harris through, and he'll have a lot of support to try to get through, maybe some pressure to get through, because it will be important to who wins the state team title the next week. So, that can be one of those things where you don't want to look at who's got the singlet on. You don't want to be paying attention to that. You just want to worry about, who you got to wrestle, or like go out and wrestle your match, as opposed to, all these people trying to hype up this one person that you're getting ready to wrestle against in the blood round or whatever. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
I 100% agree.
Okay. All right. So let's jump to our last one, and let's jump to 182. And we're going to talk about another Harris from Asheville. What do you see? Can you see it?
Can you see it? Section, right?
Yeah, this is north. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Honestly, I would say those top three are pretty solidified in their place. I think it'll be interesting to see who's going to get that fourth spot. I really couldn't tell you, because their records aren't going to be super foretelling. They're all about 60-70% success rate. But I think that this might be a weight that maybe a Weaver or a school Piedmont, someone who's got that shot at the team title, Claiborne County, who doesn't have somebody in that top three. This is an exact spot where you think you could probably push through.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with you. So for those of you who don't know, I mean, Dylan Harris is one of Asheville's best wrestlers. So he's certainly up there. I believe Harris and Freer from Ohatchee have wrestled before, Curvin. We've talked throughout this conversation about the importance of positioning yourself to be able to be successful the following weekend. You talked about the preparation during the course of the week. What are I don't want to use coach speak, because I think that I don't want things to be kind of cliche. And I don't want to overstate how important it is to where you finish, because you have to focus on the tournament in front of you, right? You have to focus on doing your job one match at a time. Again, coach speak. Was there any in your kind of when you were wrestling and getting prepared and going through sectionals, go back to that sophomore year, were you thinking about state and you should have been focused on your section more, or has that not really been ever an issue?
No, I mean, my thought process definitely changed. Before I get super into that, I would like to say to every wrestler that you called it coach speak, but I think that the cliches are cliches for a reason with wrestling. There's so much that I've learned being in college that didn't make sense to me then, but makes so much more sense to me now. Mm-hmm. Like the one that I always used to battle with was the difference between being confident and being cocky. I always ended up veering into more being super unconfident myself instead of being cocky, because I never wanted to lose to someone I didn't think I was supposed to. So I'm always super anxious when I wrestle. It just so happens to be who I am. But yeah, I mean, so I could tell you what happened in the sectional consolation semifinals. I was wrestling a kid named Jack Tatombe from Foley, and I was winning that match 2-1 because I'd gotten 2 penalty points. I didn't score a single offensive point that entire match.
Okay.
So it was probably a minute left, and I'm hanging on this Russian. I'm pushing. I'm really just trying to make it to state, and I'm pushing. And somewhere, somehow, he gets out of it. Probably the best double leg this kid's ever done. And he gets a takedown. We go out of bounds. There is literally 13 seconds left. And I made the decision right then and there that I didn't want to win. I didn't want to go into overtime. I didn't want to get that quick, easy escape, get out, and wrestle. So, and that was probably the toughest part of my entire career, was realizing at some point I didn't want to wrestle anymore. But overall, I don't regret that decision, because
Really?
if I did, I wouldn't have never decided that I should probably go back to club. I didn't go to club that entire off season from my freshman year, where I had qualified for state, to my sophomore year. I made really wrong eating choices, got up to about 250 and then cut 30 pounds in 3 weeks. But I did very minimal running. It was mostly trash bags and working out. So in seriousness, I made a lot of really wrong decisions. I wouldn't say that my preparation for that would be. No, but like you said, I looked at it every one match at a time. I looked at it as if sectionals and state was one gigantic tournament.
Okay.
We got this match. Because they I don't know why they did to me. My junior and senior year, that I was the 2 or the 1 seed, and they used to pencil in kids for me the first round, so that I'd always have a first round match. Like if there's 10 kids, they made this kid the 15 seed or the 16 seed. So I get that, and honestly, I loved it because it was just more pins I got to add to my record. But I wrestled. It's just one giant thing. I thought was that, as you're saying it, I was thinking about it, because I remember wrestling. I can't think of his name now. Gideon Ezekiel from James Clemens. Then I wrestled Malachi Butler from Gadsden City. Then Tate Campbell from Sparkman. Then I wrestled Dawson Ray. I just thought of it as one giant bracket, and then it fed into wrestled Tate Campbell again in the quarters. Then I wrestled Mikey Lucenti from Bob Jones, and then wrestled Thor in the finals. It's just, I guess I never really thought of it as a tournament as much as it is. I got to wrestle this match. That's it.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting weekend. I think we will. I think we'll see some things that are not surprising at all, and then we will see some things that were like, that's interesting. That's a little bit different. Are you good for getting on next week and then breaking down some brackets and maybe picking a favorite in each bracket?
Oh, I'm already ready. I've already got my favorites in here. I'm ready for next week.
He's already made his decisions. He hasn't even seen the wrestling this weekend yet. No, it's okay. That sounds good, Jaxon. We will catch up next week. If everybody's watching, if anyone's watching it, turn in next week. I don't know, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday or so after the brackets are posted, and Jaxon and I will get together and have a conversation about kind of the matches that we're most looking forward to. Work for you?
Good work for me.